Legion of Stars, Chapter 0, Part 1, Recounting the Past. Lune sat, age 6, staring into what was called the Mirror, the prized magnum opus of Lunari. It was a window into the Fae. Little Lune stared into the mirror with a searching eye. "What are you doing?" A gruff voice came from behind him. Lune turned to see a Jin, the crazy wizard who lived outside of town. "Just looking," Lune said with trepidation. The gold dragonborn Jin took a swig from a metal flask. "Looking for what?" "Nothing." "Can't be looking for nothing." Jin started fishing about in his coat. "Can you read yet, kid?" "Yeah." Jin extended out a letter. The seal was a black wax with a narrow 8-pointed star. Lune took it and read the letter. "Jin, my friend, I write this to you with utmost caution. I do believe the chance that I and my wife die on our latest venture is high. For this instance, I do hope that you take care of my son, Lune. Train him how I was trained. I know that you cannot work in the ways of holy men, but you can teach him spells. Just take care of him. Soris Uverweiss, the Knight's Servant." Lune finished reading the letter and looked up at Jin. The Dragonborn looked down at the small Eladrian. They both seemed to know that the next few decades would be a strange day-by-day experience. A few years later, when Lune was around 10, he joined a hunting troop. He served as watchman for the campsite, then as scout, then the trapper. He eventually got good enough to be marked as archerer, and tracked and shot game. Throughout his life with Jin, Lune was being taught and failing spells. For some reason, his brain couldn't wrap around arcane concepts. Jin was a relentless teacher, though. Failure was first met with what he called a lifestyle discipline. This could range from no dinner that night to sleeping outside for a week and then finding the house. The Elvish woods shifted things around, so getting home could take days on its own. Eventually, the abuse moved to verbal, then literary. Can't master it? Read more. Learning became painful. Lune started to learn through old stories of heroes and the way they used magics. Typically, the tales he took to were of knights that learned to cast spells. When he started to think of it that way, where martial prowess took prevalence over magic, then learning spells was easier. They were not spectacular feats, they were attacks, feigns, parries. Lune was 15 when he started learning this way. He was 17 when he asked Jin about his journal. Lune found it, one day, left out on a coffee table. Curiosity got the better of him and he opened the journal. He saw the hunter's codes in Jin's handwriting. Only he was talking about things that weren't wolves and boar. He was writing titles in that cursed language he taught Lune ages ago. Deep speech, he called it. Then Lune saw the sketch. It was an abomination, a horrible monstrosity. He knew it was a sketch, but most of its mass was just a hole drilled into the paper from relentless scribbling. Something started to creep into his mind. Lune snapped the book shut and threw it across the room. A thought started in his mind. Whatever that was, it needed to be purged, removed from this reality. Jin inevitably found out, and threw himself into a drunken outrage. He regressed 3 stages of discipline and had Lune sleep outside for a month. He was left with 4 books, 2 knives, a trap, and his katana. He made his way back to Lunari as quick as possible. The weeks of nights were almost entirely sleepless. Lune was already known as an Awoken, an elf that went through some trauma that caused them not to dream of the afterlife. Typically, elves dreamt of the afterlife until maturity, at age 100. Lune's dreams during those weeks in the woods had shifted from his normal fantastical dreams to nightmares most foul. He would often jolt awake in the early hours of the morning before the moon had even started her descent. He would be sweating profusely and incapable of trying to rest. Something had entered his mind. The only way to find it, he would eventually learn, was conscious thought. Actively focusing on his own thoughts and burning anything that wasn't his own. It was like getting rid of incessant, intrusive thoughts. Lune once found himself arranging a corpse of a boar in a summoning circle of sorts. As soon as he noticed what he was doing, he kicked the circle out and threw the body into the woods. That day you went hungry. It took weeks to get home, and when he arrived, Ajin seemed to have forgiven him. He explained to Lune later that the nightmares were punishment enough. On Lune's 18th birthday, he got his arcane focus. In the summer of his 20th year, he met his future wife. She was interested in the ways of the arcane and in the other Eladrin elf, though she didn't tell Lune that then. When Ajin was the sort of town drunk, Lune was seen as the town's recluse, the shy intellectual. Back then, his hair was still light blonde, his eyes still ocean blue. The full effect of his Fey ancestry hadn't set in yet. He looked up from what he was reading and met her gaze. She had long, flowing brunette hair and eyes like amber. She seemed to radiate warmth in her smile and posture. She smelled like wildflowers and warm spring winds. "Hello?" She inclined her head. Lune noticed he was staring. He blinked. "Sorry, what can I do for you?" "You're a student of that wizard Ajin, aren't you?" So that's what the townsfolk were calling him. "Yes, why do you ask? Do you need something requisitioned?" A warm, soft smile parted her lips. "Oh no," she said. "I just wanted to study what he has in that great big house. I was wondering if you could get me in there." "It's just boring old books," Lune said cautiously. He had since been shown the room full of black books. Ajin's cellar was full of history on the Eldritch. Lune was not allowed to read most of it until his mind was more fortified. He was also sworn to keep the fact of their existence a complete secret. Nothing of wonderment or entertainment. "I'm not looking for entertainment." That same warm smile. "I'm looking to learn." Lune raised an eyebrow quizzically. "How old are you?" "How rude!" she exclaimed. "Answer." Lune felt some magic in his own words. He was still getting used to just learning. Some must have slipped in. 19, she said. "I haven't awoken, and I don't want to talk about it." "Well, that explains a lot." Lune rose and dusted off his pants. The girl looked confused at his words. "If you were any older than 100, you would have 1. Already know better methods to find magic, and 2. Know that a Jinn is a lunatic." "So the answer is no?" Lune started walking to the tree line. "I didn't say that." She stood, uncertain, while Lune entered the forest. He turned to look at her. "Are you coming or not?" When they arrived at the house, Lune unlocked the door. "Only looking, no touching, and no wandering. Do I make myself clear?" She nodded. "You are my guest, and shall act as such." He paused before opening the door. "I can't believe that this just came to mind, but what's your name?" "Asilla Wonderwood." "Ah, wait. Daughter of Jacques Wonderwood?" "Yes, how did you know?" Lune opened the door. "He runs the hunting troop. The library is this way." Lune started inviting her to the house more and more after this event, and started watching her not out of caution, but admiration and affection. She was beautiful. He couldn't deny that. And they were both awoken. Age to them was treated like they were humans, so it wasn't like they were children. Marriage wasn't off the table. Why was he thinking about marriage? He was 20, and most humans were married by 17. Lune found himself struggling with these feelings for about a month until one night. They were walking back to Asilla's home under the moon of a late winter night. They were discussing different gossips around Lunari. Lune could never recall what they were talking about, but they were both laughing when they arrived at Asilla's doorstep. When should I see you next?" Lune asked. "I think I'll be doing things with Dad until Monday." "Well, I'll be waiting to see you." Lune turned to leave. "Until then, farewell." He was maybe 20 feet away when she called from the doorstep. "Lune, when are you going to ask?" He stopped without turning. His confidence started rising. Do it now or do it never, he thought. "Just when? Be brave. Are you going? Coward! He glanced behind him and ran through the Feywild. In a blink before Asilla could finish, Lune was in front of her. She shrank back out of an instant of fear as his eyes had grown frosty. He reached down his hands, still cold, and lifted her chin. "You want to go out on Monday?" he asked playfully. Asilla grabbed the back of his head. Her hands felt like a warm spring breeze on his cold skin. Standing on tiptoe, she kissed him. "Absolutely." They started dating after that. 6 months later, they were married. A month after that, they had a child. And 25 years later, Lune had to leave. He was 46 and had to go Ronin, in the way that a Jin had said his elven house had for generations. He needed to make a name for himself as a warrior. He kissed Asilla goodbye and checked on his son. He was not like his parents. Lune II had no trauma, and thus was one who dreamt. Lune wanted to keep it that way. Lune's final goodbye was to his old mentor, Jin. He gave Lune his arcane focus and a sword. Jin, this isn't my katana. But when he looked up, Jin, Asilla, and even the large house were gone. Lune stood alone. Well, there was his horse Stardust, but he still felt alone. Lune made his way to Polska through the pass of Kaldur. Past the mountains, Lune saw the scar on the earth that had been marked at the end of the Second Age. Magic anomalies stained the earth. Lune was not one to feel the weave of magic normally, but he could tell here something was wrong. Lune traveled as far as he could before meeting exhaustion. Once he felt both tired and safe, he slept in a tree. That night he stared up at the moon. Lune had always had a strange feeling of connection with the moon and stellar bodies. He was thinking of these things as he fell asleep. Lune awoke with a package and a note on his lap. He opened the parcel to find a small silver ring. Set on top was a black diamond that seemed to have stars floating in it. Lune read the note. It seems you have caught the attention of someone. Watching you should be fun. Make it interesting and get more prizes. A humble servant. Lune wondered at the ring and then placed it on his right hand. He climbed down from his tree and mounted Stardust. Together they set off to Bainsley. Lune arrived at the little border town, the first Polskan town past the mountains that housed dwarves, wood elves, and humans. Lune did not know how to place the village's aesthetic. Quaint, maybe, would be the word. It was a farming town, with still remaining scars of the past wars. A mile before the town, there were old dugouts and half-standing cobblestone walls. The people in the village seemed to ignore the old wounds of the land, almost like they were just a part of the terrain. It made some sense. The wars were just under 700 years ago, after all. Lune hitched Stardust outside of a local tavern when he arrived. When he walked in, he was expecting brutal racism. After all, the elves started the last wars and caused all of those scars on the terrain. But there was nothing. A few side eyes, but no outright bigotry. Lune bought a room to crash for the night. He was surprised to see it had a small vanity. To what he had seen of small farming houses and read about Polska, they were relatively poor in the beauty area of living. Elves, on the other hand, had a god, their only god, whose only demand was that they make beautiful things. Lune thought of this all while inspecting the small vanity. He wasn't looking at the mirror. Well, not really. But he had already noticed cultural differences. Elves bathed daily. By the smell here, people washed up weekly at best. Elves had mirrors and paintings everywhere. Their human counterparts seemed to not mind as many bare walls and rough features. Lune's eyes met his reflection. It had been a week or two since he'd last seen, well, himself. He chuckled a bit. Same as always. He then untied the long ribbon around his long hair, allowing it to fall down to his belt, and threw himself in the room's bed. When he woke the next morning, Lune looked out to see Stardust was missing. Frantically, Lune asked the townsfolk. Everyone said they didn't know what happened. Then Lune overheard something about bandits attacking the town. Where are they? Lune demanded. The townsperson looked up and up until he met Lune's eyes. They're just east of the town, about 2 or 3 miles out. Lune bolted. He ran in the still morning dew as it set upon the grass. After 20 minutes, Lune saw the encampment. Before the first guard even spoke out, Lune's sword flew through his neck. A horn sounded. Lune planted his sword in the ground and grabbed his bow. Taking little time to aim, Lune shot an arrow and it flew into the watchman's throat, toppling him off the tower. Now they knew death was here. As bandits climbed to the archery positions and swarmed out of the gates, Lune notched 2 arrows. The archers shot 2 arrows. One landed in Lune's shoulder. His 2 arrows struck true, knocking 2 of the archers off the wall.
Then swordsmen came at him. Lune danced around their attacks and grabbed his own sword out of the dirt. He hamstringed one of the bandits, knocking him out of the fight, then parried a blow from the other and leaned in for a killing riposte across their chest. Lune then heard 5 bowstrings pull taut. "Hold!" a voice bellowed. A tall man with a barreled chest and a blindfold over one eye stepped to the top of the camp's gate. "Elf, what brings you here, and why are you killing my men?" "Where is my horse?" Lune demanded. The man's one eye took on a look of confusion. "What?" "My horse, stalled in Bainsley. She was lost last night when some of your boys were spotted raiding. Where is she?" An arrow shot, aimed for Lune. He sent his sword in the way. The arrow hit the very blade and split in twain. "Winsley, knock it off!" One of the archers put down his bow. "Tulin, what happened to his horse?" The bandit captain leaned down as though listening to something. "Apparently she ran off. You're lying," Lune called back. "Tulian said she vanished, popped out of existence, nothing but snow left behind." Lune stood there for a moment, testing the man's words in his mind. When he found no deceit, he turned and left quickly. Lune spent the rest of his day drinking spirits until he was a spirit. He still had a job to do, but he was planning on staying here an extra day anyway. The next day he set out on foot to Silverfield. The trip took 4 days on foot. The night he entered the town, a red star tore across the sky. A deep rumbling filled the air as the star passed the visible horizon. When Lune entered the little crossroad town, he instantly saw that the tavern was on fire. What fun. He was sent here to find an associate of Ajin, so he checked the prison first. Lune talked his way into the guardhouse, and thus into the holding cells in the back. He walked through from cell to cell, looking for a woman named Lakgala. Lune found one with long black hair that hung off of the cot, and she was slumped on. He called her name in the abysmal language Ajin taught him. "Simalag?" Torches flickered, but the prisoner gave no response. "May as well ask." Lune turned to the escorting guard. "Could you show me where one Lakgala is?" "Mergala?" the guard asked. "Well, I'm an idiot," Lune thought. Then he turned to leave. On his way out, Lune ran into the guard captain, who was entering the back cells. The captain didn't seem to notice Lune standing right next to him. "Terrence, get the tavern burners out. Mayor Gala wishes to speak with them." The guard escorting Lune whipped around in an about-face and went to some cells further down the hall. Lune tried to get the guard captain's attention to no avail. The captain whipped around and walked out of the back holding cells. Lune decided to just follow the convicts to the town hall. The 3 individuals, one a dwarf, another a white dragonborn, and the last a wood elf, were escorted by 2 guards. Lune was led by the shadows, staying a few feet behind the party of criminals. When they arrived at the town hall, Lune hid in the dark beside an immense staircase. The dragonborn, who looked like a wizard, apparently saw him. He called to Lune in the horrible language of the Elder Things. Lune just slid back deeper into the darkness. After a moment, the doors at the top of the stairs flew open. Light poured down the stairs, and a tall, thin woman stepped forward, her hair floating behind her and her eyes glowing gold. "You 4, come up here, please." She then turned back into what looked like her office. Lune took up the rear as they walked up the stairs. The office was covered in light. A shadow could not be found. "I'm going to ask you, because you all appear to have been the most qualified despite last night's events. Help us with this, and we will forgive your issues. There have been disappearances and strange sightings. Some say it is a new cult, and I would be led to believe that line of thought. We think they are located somewhere in the town, though there has been a lot of activity in the southwest, too. I would like you to look into it. The most recent problem we ran into was at the Church of Pelor. A ruffian went in, and our priest used to be a powerful cleric of the Dawnfather himself, and thus burned a hole through the church heretic and the church's floor, and the ground beneath. He is now resting in his residence." All 4 travelers agreed to help. They were given a map of the town and set off to investigate the supposed cult. It was the middle of the night, but the party still made their way to the church. On the way, they did introductions. The Wood Elf Bard was named Theodore. The Dragonborn was called Osama Hussein, and the dwarf was a paladin of the light, meaning Pelor, Sarenrae, and Lathander, named Grim. When they arrived, they saw he wasn't so much a church as it was a minor cathedral. They stepped inside, having gone through one of the windows. Their footsteps echoed. Lune immediately saw the hole in the ground. It spanned at least 20 feet in diameter and sank into nothing. Then Theodore seemed to have sticky fingers as he went about trying to steal things. Lune saw him walk into a back area with a lot of displays. There were sounds of chains wrapping around something and a whelp. Then Grim walked back into the vault to investigate. After a moment, Grim and Theodore came back. Grim had a new hammer, made of what looked like platinum and gold with a spike on the end, and Theodore had a white and gold violin along with chain marks on his arm. "You guys find anything?" Grim asked in his gruff voice. "Not really. The only thing that seems interesting is..." Lune turned to look at the gaping hole in the floor. "That." The party gathered at the hole's edge. The pit dropped and dropped, so deep that even Grim's dark vision could not pierce its shadows. Lune could hear rushing water in the distance, as though there was a great river deep below the observable parts of the pit. Grim pointed out something on one of the walls. It was a tunnel that led into the ground, beneath the church. Lune fashioned a rope ladder with knots and threw the working end down the hole. Grim decided to go down first. He reasoned that if anyone fell, he could hoist them up. After him was Theodore, then Osama, then Lune. On his way down, Lune slipped. He lost hold of the rope and started to fall. The sound of rushing water grew louder and louder, until he was suddenly stopped. A metal gauntlet pressed against the back of his neck as Grim pulled him up onto the ledge by Lune's collar. "Thanks," Lune sighed. Grim gave a gruff grunt and a nod. Lune looked up and saw they were in a cave of sorts. Part of the walls seemed to be cut out, but most of their surroundings looked wholly natural. They all stood in about an inch of water when Osama lit a torch. Lune, Grim, and Theodore all flinched away as light spontaneously lit the 40 feet around them. "You know you need to warn an elf before you go doing that, right?" Lune asked. We can see in the dark, and that's incredibly painful to look at right now." Osama didn't seem to care as he continued into the cave. Lune rushed ahead, making sure to be quiet, almost dancing along the protruding rocks to not touch the water. When he came to a crossroads, he held up a fist and peeked around the corner. Lune saw 3 men in hooded robes and heard something off to his right that sounded like a baby crying, if a baby could cry in bass. Grim came up behind Lune as he attempted to sneak. His armor clanked and clattered. The hooded cultists turned their heads. Lune snapped back behind the rock wall just in time to not get caught. "Anders, did you hear something?" A voice came. "Maybe. Wait here." There was the sound of boots on cobbles that turned to soft sloshing in one step. Theodore apparently heard the cultists talking as he snapped the torch out of Osama's hand and snuffed out the flame in water. Lune pushed Grim back as he backed up. They both saw the shape of the cultist as he rounded the corner. Grim quietly slid his hammer off his back. The cultist walked a few feet and started to light a torch. Grim walked up and slammed the hammer into the cultist's head. There was an unsettlingly quiet crack as the cultist's head turned unnaturally, and he fell to the floor like a sack of grain. Lune drew his longsword and stood at the ready as Grim stepped forward. Lune had a strange feeling. He'd been traveling for nearly a month now, but he could feel the beginning of his journey as a Ronin. As he snuck towards the cultists, Lune could feel the warrior blood pulse through his body. The trial had begun. Legion of Stars is written and produced by Alex Peer. The World of Teledar is created by Luke Warner. If you'd like to support the show, you can go check us out on Patreon. We're Studio Warlock there, and for $5 you can get all of the scripts to these videos, as well as some animation behind the scenes. If you don't want to pay us money though, you can go check out the Nacho Warlock YouTube channel and click that little subscribe button. It costs you nothing, and you'll just get notified whenever we upload a video, and you'll be boosting my analytics to make it so that I can actually start getting paid for this. Beyond that, that's been Chapter 0. I hope you enjoyed it. There will be a Part 2 of Chapter 0 coming out, because I noticed that I need to recover all of Lune's past in order to have the story remain coherent. So that's what we're doing now. But until next time, we here at Studio Warlock would like to say safe travels and happy hunting.